Trailing Thoughts from Airport Gap. If planes were like people, would jets be considered the jocks? Would they throw hangar parties when their parents were out of town? If one plane said to the other, "I just flew in from the coast, and boy, are my arms tired," would it be considered a joke or just normal conversation?
Sometimes people just say, "Can you hold my hand?" And you make that difference. And you're helping them get through a bad day.
As part of the American Cities Climate Challenge, we partnered with OUC and the Science Center to bring the Orlando Tiny Greenhouse today. Visitors have an opportunity to engage in a lot of cool interactive features that will be guiding them on how to save money and reduce their environmental impact. Even though this technology has evolved, not everybody can afford EV or solar right now, so there's a lot of other great highlights of low cost and no cost opportunities to save residents money that you'll learn about when you visit the home. And the greenhouse is on wheels, so we're going to be able to take it around the community and have people enjoy it and learn from it in various different areas of our community.
Trailing Thoughts from Bumby Path. This is such a friendly neighborhood because people have been aggressively waving at me a lot today. What is that sound I keep hearing behind me? Oh, I'm dragging a child's kite. How long have I been dragging that for? And why didn't any of these nice people tell me?
This song hits home for me. You see a lot of violence outside and you get used to it after a while.
For the past 4 weeks, we have been teaching the kids about telling their own story. You know, they listen to music all the time and they don't recognize that a lot of these artists and stuff like that they're really just telling their own story through lyrical pieces.
Our goal each and every day is to get every single young king to tap into his ability and his voice, to constantly allow them to, feel more comfortable even in those spaces that might not be as safe, but to be brave and to speak up for those things that they know they need to vocalize.
So I really want them to find their internal value, find things that they're passionate about through this program.
And that's what MBK is all about, is we come together and we're trying to just help coach them along through their processes to make sure that partnerships like this and others
Good afternoon and welcome to the May 15th, 2023 workshop of the Orlando City Council. Good morning, commissioners. As you know, we've got a lot of issues swirling around, and today we have two workshops on a couple of important ones. First, we're going to have a update on the recent legislative session, and then after that we'll have an update on our homeless efforts and strategies as we continue to address this community challenge. So we'll begin with a legislative update, and session ended last Friday. Governor has yet to, two Fridays ago. Governor has yet to act on a lot of the bills that have passed, including the state budget, but we thought it was important to go ahead and talk about some of the key bills that are going to his desk. So our Director of Intergovernmental Relations, Kyle Shepard, is going to take us through a session overview and identify some of the key bills for the city itself. Kyle?
Good morning, Mayor. Good morning, Commissioners. Glad to be back here in front of this legislative body instead of one of the other ones. I want to go through, we have just a little bit of time this morning to go through some of the key bills that passed this session. Before I get started, there are, as you know, lots of bills that passed through and were debated in Tallahassee this session. Our job as your representatives in Tallahassee is to stay focused on the bills that impact the government and proprietary and corporate powers that you have as a city council. There are a lot of bills out there, we understand, that were concerning to many of your constituents, distressing to many of your constituents. Our job is to stay focused in on the ones that impact us directly here at the City of Orlando. And so you'll see a lot of bills here today that, you'll see a lot of bills that we don't talk about today. We're going to talk about the ones that impact us directly and that, that passed. At some point, I'll come and see each of you here in the next couple weeks and spend a little time taking a little deeper dive into some of the bills that did not pass. And as the legislative session works, oftentimes the success that your team in Tallahassee has is measured not in the bills that pass, but in the bills that don't pass. So I want to come and talk to you about those in the next week or so.
So what Kyle's saying is we played total defense and had no offense this year.
Yeah, that's what we do. First of all, some members of your contract lobbying team are here. These are the pros that help me out and help us out in Tallahassee. We have the Pittman Law Group. Sean Pittman, he's not here today. I told him not to drive down all the way from Tallahassee for the next 30 minutes. But Oscar Anderson from Southern Group is here, and also Kaylee Slatery is also here from the Southern Group as well. Also with the Southern Group is Chris Dudley, who's up in Tallahassee, who does a lot of hard work for us as well. And then for the Gray Robinson team, we've got an all-star team there as well. And I think Chris Carmody is here with us today, right behind me. And we have other members of the Gray Robinson team based in Orlando and also in Tallahassee. Oh, and one other introduction I just want to introduce real quick. Every year, UCF has a series of a cohort of legislative scholars that gets to go to Tallahassee, and they get paired up with members of the legislature, or they get paired up with lobbyists and government agencies like me. And I was lucky enough this session to have Natasha Cottrell here with UCF. She just graduated. She doesn't have to be here. She's totally done with college. But she was a great assist to us during this legislative session, and she will be here to answer any questions you have at the end of this presentation. Quick session overview. Regular session is 60 days every year. This year it was in March and May, just concluded a couple weeks ago. A lot of the business of session is done during interim committee weeks. Those occurred during December, January, and February of this year. Here are some of the important stats about the number of bills. There's a lot that happens during legislative session. This year there were over 1,800 bills that were filed in the legislature. There were over 3,400 total text filed, meaning bills or bills that were amended. And your legislative team is going through all of those during that time frame. More than 2,600 amendments were filed, over 3,000 votes were taken, and there were 356 of those bills that passed through both houses. Now, some of those still have to be acted on by the governor. We'll talk about that in a little bit. That's more than normal. That's a higher number than normal. Out of the 1,800 or so bills that are filed, just an estimate, about 500 to 600, something in there, directly impact or indirectly impacts the business of cities and counties. Out of that 500 or 600 this year, your legislative team tracked 391 of those bills by the end of session. And that's a system that we have to make sure that we're watching every amendment that's filed on those bills, and then also every vote that occurs on those bills. Out of the 391 that we tracked, 75 of them passed through the House and the Senate. So historically, you'll see here more bills were passed into law than in years past. You'll notice that there was a dip in the number of bills that were actually filed. That's a little bit misleading. There was a change in the way that the House handles appropriations, and so appropriations don't have to be filed as standalone bills anymore. So while there were fewer bills, the substantive bills were really about the same as they have been in past years in terms of number. So let's go over some of the bills that passed that impact us here at the city. Local Government Comp Plan, SB 540. This bill would provide attorneys' fees and costs to the local government if someone challenged a comprehensive plan decision that you all made. This bill is being opposed by a number of environmental groups who are concerned that it will squelch or disincentivize citizen groups from challenging comprehensive plan amendments. From local government's perspective, it might reduce the number of challenges. I don't think we've ever had a comp plan challenge in front of DOA, so this may not impact us that much. But if this is signed into law, groups that, or anybody that files a challenge to a Chapter 163 comp plan amendment may be liable for attorney's fees if they fail in that challenge. This bill also exempts the Florida colleges from the application of certain land development regulations. So that's, like in our county, that's Valencia. The university system had already been exempt from many of the land development regulations of local governments. This expands that to include the Florida college system. But it's not a total preemption. Your land development regulations as they relate to allowable uses, density, and intensity are still apply to state colleges. And then also, in a piece of good news in this bill, there was a split between different district courts of appeal on exactly how much deference to give local governments, city governments, when they made decisions on land development orders. This bill resolved that split between the districts, and it resolved it, just to give it to you in as plain language as I can, it resolved it in a way that gives you more discretion and less discretion from the court. So your decisions on land development orders are less likely to be disturbed under this standard that passed in this bill. This bill is the one bill that is still sitting on the governor's desk right now. Oh, next bill, HB 639. You remember the last few years we have sought local bills that would make it easier for smaller mom and pop restaurants to get a special beverage license from the state to serve beverages in their restaurants. There is a statute that forbids restaurants under a certain size from getting special beverage licenses from DPBR. So the last few years, we've run local bills that allow your businesses that are in our main streets to get those special beverage licenses. This year, finally, the legislature said, hey, why don't we just do that statewide? And so now smaller restaurants can receive those same beverage licenses, but when they reduced the size of the restaurants, they didn't reduce it all the way to the small size that our local bills have. So our Main Street districts and the businesses in them still have the advantage of those local bills are still more advantageous. And that bill has been signed into law. Okay, ethics requirements for public officials. This applies to each of you other than the mayor. The mayor has already had to file Form 6, but as you know, every year you all file a limited financial disclosure called Form 1 with the Commission on Ethics. The legislature, statewide elected officials, and county officials and school board officials all file the Form 6, which is a more expansive financial disclosure. For years, the Commission on Ethics has asked the legislature to expand that Form 6 requirement to municipal elected officials. It was only a matter of time before that occurred, and it in fact occurred this year. So it doesn't start this year, but starting next year, you will have to file the Form 6 disclosure rather than the Form 1. And legal or somebody from legal will come and sit with you or the clerk's office and show you exactly what. You'll get a notice before you need to file it, but it'll be next year. It doesn't apply this year. This bill originally also would have required city managers and CAOs to file the Form 6, and that was taken out of the bill. Operation of golf carts. Golf carts, of course, are now popular ways to get around some of our neighborhoods. I wanted to talk about this bill because there's a little bit of a misunderstanding about it. If you're driving around now in a golf cart on municipal roads, if you're under 18, you now have to have a driver's license, okay? If you're over 18, you don't need a driver's license, but you do have to have some sort of state-issued ID. But where some people got confused about this is that some folks were under the impression that this allows people to drive golf carts on public streets. And that's not true. You still retain the authority that you always had under state statute to decide whether or not to allow golf carts to drive on city streets. So that is still, you were not preempted in that. But if you do designate streets for golf carts, drivers that are under 18 have to have a driver's license. Okay, let's talk about this bill for a few minutes because this is kind of one of the big ones. Local ordinances, SB 170. This bill came up last session, and it was paired with another bill that was intended to make it easier for those plaintiffs that want to challenge local ordinances in court. So you remember last session, this bill did not pass, but a similar measure did pass, and it would have expanded the Burt-Harris Act to allow businesses that feel that an ordinance impairs their business revenue to seek damages against the local government for that impairment. Luckily, thankfully, that bill was vetoed by the governor, so it did not go into effect. This bill, however, came back this year, and it's a little bit different. I want to run through some of the requirements. There's good things and probably bad things in this bill. One, going forward, local governments will have to prepare something called a business impact statement anytime an ordinance is brought to you for your consideration. We have to post that business impact statement on the city's website, and we have to post it on the website at the same time that you post the notice of enactment in the local paper for that ordinance. The impact statement includes a summary of the ordinance, and you have to describe the public purpose that is being served by the ordinance. That's stuff that is already done. All those fancy whereas clauses you see in your ordinance, that's what those are. Those are an explanation of what the ordinance is about in plain language, and then also an explanation of what public purpose is being advanced by the ordinance. That doesn't change current law. Current law requires that there be a public purpose behind every ordinance that you consider and adopt. Then next, you have to make a good faith estimate. Your staff will provide you with a good faith estimate of the direct economic impact on businesses in the city of the ordinance. So that includes direct compliance cost. So if there was, say, a new permit fee, that would have to be laid out in the impact statement. Any regulatory cost, our best estimate of what that is, and then a good faith estimate of what we think the number of businesses that will be impacted. And so permitting and economic development staff will have to run an analysis through our, presumably using our business tax receipts to come up with an idea of how many businesses are impacted by the ordinance. This is not dissimilar to what the legislature requires of itself when it does bills. And then also they require state agencies. So we knew this was a matter of time before this went into effect for cities and counties as well. In the bill, it says very clearly that you do not have to hire a financial professional. You don't have to hire an economist to do this. This is meant to be something that can be done by staff. But there are a lot of exceptions to the ordinances that require the business impact statement. And importantly, one of the groups of ordinances that do not need a business impact statement is any ordinance dealing with the implementation of your growth management plan. So anything implementing Part 2 of Chapter 163, anything related to the Land Development Code, comprehensive plan, land development orders. So when you think about all the ordinances that are on your agendas, the lion's share of them is land development orders. Those won't need business impact statements. And there's a variety of other ordinances that also don't require them as well. We worked hard to get these exceptions in there so that this wasn't overly burdensome. And thankfully, the legislature agreed to many of them. And so that will reduce the burden that this has on local government. Let's see. Okay, here's an unfortunate part of this bill. Remember I told you that the legislature was seeking ways to make it easier for some businesses, some interest groups to challenge ordinances adopted by local governments. Under this bill, a city must suspend enforcement of an ordinance that is challenged on one of two grounds. If the ordinance is challenged because it is expressly preempted, or if the ordinance is alleged to be arbitrary or unreasonable. If one of those two allegations are made, and that is the basis of a legal challenge against an ordinance, and the ordinance is challenged within 90 days of it being enacted, then the plaintiff can ask for the ordinance to be suspended, and the ordinance is suspended until the court makes a decision on whether or not the ordinance is actually expressly preempted or arbitrary or unreasonable. Now, we obviously objected to that. There were a couple measures put into place to mitigate what we thought was the harm created by this bill. One of them is that any case that challenges a local ordinance on those two grounds, the court is now obligated to put that on the rocket docket. So they have to get it done as expeditiously as possible, so you don't have an ordinance suspended out there for an unreasonable amount of time. In addition to that, we managed to get an amendment placed in there that says that if you do challenge an ordinance based on one of those two things, that if the court finds that you challenge the ordinance for some improper purpose, like to delay something, then the court must sanction the plaintiff. And so there's a financial disincentive to bring claims that are not substantiated, or bring claims that the purpose of which is simply to delay the implementation of an ordinance that you all passed. Again, that same list of ordinances that you don't have to do a business impact statement for, those ordinances also are not subject to this provision related to challenges as well. So that's good news. In addition to that, courts may now award attorney's fees and for cost and damages to a prevailing plaintiff in a civil action challenging an ordinance as arbitrary or unreasonable. That was already the law for challenges against ordinances that were expressly preempted by state law. This now adds ordinances that are challenged as being arbitrary or unreasonable. We were fortunate enough to get a limit in there of $50,000 rather than an unlimited recovery amount. And then finally, and this is good news in this bill, there was recently a circuit court case. You know, when you are adopting or considering an ordinance and maybe you run out of time, or you have some different thoughts about an ordinance and you want to maybe amend it, you often can defer or continue an ordinance to a date certain. And you don't have to re-advertise the ordinance. So if you say, hey, look, we're going to have this ordinance at the next council meeting on such and such date, you don't have to re-advertise the ordinance. There was a circuit court case that held to the contrary, which was just contrary to existing law that had been around for forever. And this bill overturned that case and said, hey, wait a minute, local governments, if you continue an ordinance to a date certain, you don't have to re-advertise that ordinance. So that was a good thing. By the way, you see there the status of that bill enrolled. Enrolled means that it has passed the House and the Senate, but has not yet been presented to the governor for his action. Once a bill is presented to the governor, then after session, he has 15 days to act on it. If he doesn't act on it, doesn't sign it into law, or doesn't veto it, it goes into law automatically. Okay, another good bill. Children's Initiatives Projects, HB 625 is the bill that actually passed, sponsored by our own Representative Bracy Davis in the House, and in the Senate by Senator Geraldine Thompson. And this provides some update to the Florida Children's Initiative statute. And as you know, that is the statute that funds and supports some of the very good work done by FPR. And it updates some of the terms in there, including updating the statute so it doesn't refer just to the Paramore Kid Zone, but now refers also to the Mercy Drive and Englewood Kid Zone. It eliminates a sunset of those programs. Some of those programs actually had a sunset date. And then separately, the budget that was passed provides $7.4 million for Children's Initiatives programs throughout the state. So that's not just our programs here in Orlando. That includes programs that are in Miami, Tampa, and Jacksonville. Next time you see them, please make sure that you thank Representative Bracy Davis. I think this was her first bill she passed. And then also make sure you thank Senator Thompson. This bill was worked on by our very own Reginald Burrows, who did a lot of hard work to make sure this got ferreted through the system, I think with no votes in the entire session. So thanks to him for doing that. Here's a bill that's kind of flew under the radar, but is interesting. The last few years, as you know, for maybe the last 10 years, every session we have fought to prevent the preemption of our red light camera program, which is a program we've had for a number of years. And this session, I think, was the first session ever that there was not a bill to do away with the red light camera program. So we're making progress there. People are getting used to it. They're seeing the value of the program. So this session, not only did we not see an attempt to do away with the red light program, we saw an expansion of the program to enforce speed limits in school zones. Okay, so starting as soon as the DOT is done with some rulemaking, this authorizes cities to use speed detection cameras in school zones. You can only find somebody if they're going more than 10 miles per hour over the speed limit in a school zone. It has to be a designated school zone. But it applies 30 minutes before the school day starts, and it applies 30 minutes after the school day ends, and it applies all day long that school is in session. Okay. Now this is a choice. You don't have to do this, but this is something that legal will come talk to you about, and police department will come talk to you about if you want to do. It requires us to do some things like a public awareness campaign and some other things. Proceeds from the citations that are issued are split between the state and the city. The city could use those proceeds to fund the program itself, and any excess proceeds would go to a new program called the School Crossing Guard Recruitment and Retention Program. As you know, it is very difficult. It is hard to get enough school crossing guards out on the street watching our kids go to school. This would provide a revenue source to help with that problem. Next up, SB 1068, drone delivery services. So in some parts of the state, some large retailers have begun programs of delivering goods by drones from their stores, okay? And those drone ports were being regulated in very different ways by different cities and counties throughout the state. This is one of those bills that ultimately passed, but is much better than when it started. When it started, this bill would have totally preempted local government's ability to regulate drone ports, which will be at big box stores. There's sort of these ports that have drones land on them. It would have been a total preemption. And we worked with the House sponsor, Representative Duggan, and got some limitations on what a drone port is, how big it can be, how tall it can be. We are preempted from totally banning drone delivery service based on the location of the drone port, but they are subject to the Florida Building Code. Originally, they were going to be totally exempt from the Florida Building Code, and they're not allowed in residential areas. We also managed to get a provision in there that allows us to maintain our regulations on setbacks and landscape screening. But even though it's not exempt from the Florida Building Code, they did get an exemption from certain fire protection systems under the Florida Fire Protection Code. Preemption over utility service restrictions, HB 1281. You remember in the news earlier this year, there was a number of states and cities that were prohibiting gas stoves in new residential development. This preemption forbids local governments. Really, there was already a preemption on the books. This just made it more clear that local governments can't prohibit the installation of gas stoves and grills. There was a big housing bill, and I don't want to say too much about it because you had a briefing a couple weeks ago from Elizabeth Dang, who went through all the details of the housing bill. But the Live Local Act was a big deal. It was a big bill, signed into law earlier in session, and it did a variety of things. And Elizabeth explained that to you. The one point I want to make to you here is that anytime a large piece of legislation that is complex like this goes through the system, there is always going to be, when it is operationalized by local governments, when it is implemented by local governments, things that you find that maybe are unintended consequences or opportunities to improve the bill. And I say that to you to say that as Elizabeth and Warren and others implement this bill, as we see, if we see unintended consequences, or if you detect unintended consequences, I think there'll be the opportunity for us to take some ideas for improvement back to the legislature next session. Oh, this is the final substantive bill, and it's a poignant bill, and today's an appropriate day for it. Today is Peace Officer Memorial Day, where we honor those that have fallen in the line of duty in service to their community. There's a transportation facility designation bill every year that names highways and roads throughout the state of Florida after hometown heroes. And in this bill, we managed to get a little provision that will name part of Kirkman Road from Vineland to Conroy Road after our fallen officer, Officer Kevin Valencia, nearby, where he gave his life trying to save 4 children. So a poignant bill, and we're happy to have gotten that through. Special thanks to Senator Thompson again, that's in her district, and then also Representative Rita Harris, who ran this bill for us. You see the bill sponsor is somebody else, but the real sponsors were Senator Thompson and Representative Harris. I've prattled on quite long enough, but a couple points about the budget. About 4.5% bigger than last year. $117 billion budget, just over $1 billion set aside for Florida Forever and for land acquisition. DOT Transportation Work Plan fully funded or nearly fully funded at $13.6 billion, $400 million set aside for local transportation initiatives. Visit Florida got an appropriation of $80 million. There was a debate about whether to keep Visit Florida around. As you know, Enterprise Florida was sunset in a separate piece of legislation. That function will go under the Department of Commerce, which is the new name now for the Department of Economic Opportunity. Here are some appropriations that you often ask about. Arts, cultural, and historical resources did fairly well. The cultural and museum program was a little bit lower allocation this year than last year, but on the other hand, the historic preservation programs got a higher appropriation. And I'm still going through to determine exactly which of our local organizations are going to be getting what, but I can update you on that as we move forward in the next couple of weeks. On affordable housing, Elizabeth may have mentioned this to you. Affordable housing did very, very well in the budget this year. Not only was all of the documentary stamp tax money that is supposed to go to ship and sale went there, but some money from general revenue was added into particularly the sale program, and so there is more money than usual for affordable housing. The legislature also funded the Florida Hometown Heroes program, which is the down payment assistance program for hometown heroes, police officers, teachers, firefighters, et cetera. So here's the current bill status. None of the bills have been vetoed. One is sitting on the governor's desk right now. That is that local government comprehensive plan bill that I just mentioned. There are 281 bills waiting to be delivered to the governor, and there are 73 bills that have already been signed into law. I think you'll find a lot of the bills that are waiting presentation to the governor will go to him in the next couple weeks, and we'll have this behind us here fairly quickly. Sadly, there's another legislative session in the future, and it's coming up sooner rather than later. You know, next year is an election year for state and federal offices. So next legislative session is early. It will be in January and February and a little bit into March. Committee weeks, interim committee weeks, start in September, which means we'll start seeing bills drop for next session as early as August. So a very short off-season for your legislative team. Next year, there are a variety of different things that we have heard might pop up, including there have been rumblings about enforcing term limits on municipal offices, making all municipal election dates on the same dates rather than right now where you have a number of different municipalities that hold them on different dates throughout the year. And even making municipal elections partisan, which is, of course, not something we have here in the city of Orlando. There's also continued talk about doing something about the timeliness of the issuance of land development orders and building permits. Not an issue here in Orlando, but there continues to be this narrative out there that part of the affordable housing problem is some local governments not issuing building permits as quickly as they should. Not an issue here. We fought a bill this session that would have imposed, we think, unreasonable time constraints on the review of building permits. And that's a real problem because, that's a life safety issue. And so we've got to continue to educate the state legislature on the importance of the building permit review process and why it's necessary. So with that, we can't go through everything. I'm going to come see each of you here in the next couple of weeks to take a deeper dive. If you have any questions, I know you have another workshop, but let me know, or Natasha will answer any questions that you have.
Kyle, is there any discussion of a special session?
Not that I've heard, but you never know.
And then just secondly, do you recall off the top of your head what the total amount of Sadowski is, or what the percentage is? A couple of years ago, I know that instead of allowing what was initially thought, which was 100% of Sadowski to go to housing, they chipped away at it and only gave a percentage and then took the rest of it for something else.
Right, so the way that works, you're right, last session, so for many years, the documentary stamp tax, a large portion of it went to the Sadowski funds, those two funds that we talked about for affordable housing, sale and SHIP. Last session, that formula changed so that when we say now that Sadowski was made whole, what we mean is under the new calculation. And the way that calculation works is the documentary stamp tax, a portion of it goes to SHIP and sale. I think it's roughly 50%, but the other 50% is split between resiliency programs and surface water quality programs. So in other words, there's been a sort of a permanent, if you want to view it this way, a permanent movement of some of those funds to those other worthy programs, but not affordable housing.
I just want to emphasize that we're not talking about 100% of Sadowski and getting a little more. We're talking about whatever that percent is and a little more. Commissioner Burns.
Thank you, Mayor. My question was regarding Sadowski, so I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Stewart and then Commissioner Sheehan.
Yeah, back on Live Local, because we all have love that. Your document says that it is enrolled, but the bill has passed. So the question is that the appropriations have not passed, so the promise of $711 million isn't there yet because it hasn't passed, correct?
Oh, that's right. So for the budget hasn't been presented yet. And you're right, the governor has line item veto power here in the state of Florida. So you're absolutely right. That is what's in the budget, but it could change subject to the governor's veto pin. The housing bill itself has been signed into law.
So but the housing bill is essentially contingent upon funding. If it's not funded and he decides to line item veto, what's left with the housing bill?
Well, you would still have the zoning bypass, for example. If there was a veto, you might lose money for, say, the Hometown Heroes program that is in 102. I don't think, my prediction is that you won't see a veto in that area because what is in the budget seems to be consistent with what the governor said he wanted in it. So I think that's probably what you're going to see. If there's vetoes, line item vetoes will be in other areas is my prediction.
Thanks, I appreciate that. I got plenty of questions. I won't bother everybody else with those questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Sheehan.
You answered my question on Sadowski, Mayor. That was exactly what I was going to ask too. If we were really made whole, or if they managed to offshoot the money, which they always tend to do. So I think that's something that we still need to continue to talk about. The Sadowski Fund continues to be rated for other programs. If they're very good programs, that doesn't matter. It's the fact that this money is not being put into affordable housing. My other question was on the school zone speed limits with the red light cameras. I've been a proponent of this the whole way. The only concern that I've got is that the speed limit zone changes throughout the day. Like during certain hours it's 15, and other hours it might be 25. Is this going to be a matter of enforcing the 15 all day long or the 25 at different times? I mean, how is that going to work with red light cameras?
Good question. So that's a good question. This was talked about. The way it works, you're right, is during the school day when children are walking to and from school, the speed limit comes down. So it would be 10 miles per hour above that. During the middle of the school day when children are not coming and going, but it's still the school day, the speed limit goes back to its normal speed limit and it would be 10 miles per hour above that.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I had, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kyle. And Kyle emphasized at the beginning of this that there are lots of other pieces of legislation that pass that impact our schools, impact our constituents in different manners, but we were focused today on the bills that affect city government and the entities that we control. Thank you, Kyle.
Yeah, thank you all.
Okay, our second workshop is on Orlando's action plan on unsheltered homelessness. And as you recall, last year we unveiled a plan to invest Orlando's funding from the American Rescue Plan to address two complex challenges, and that's homelessness and affordable housing, and we called that Accelerate Orlando because those issues aren't new to us, but it gave us an opportunity to leverage $58 million in federal funding that was certainly a once-in-a-generation investment, and it literally accelerates our plans to address some of these issues. So Lisa Portelli, our Senior Advisor on Homelessness and Social Services, will provide us an update on Accelerate Orlando, and we're going to look at some of our early successes and then some of the new challenges and how we are responding to them. Lisa.
Thank you, Mayor. Not up there.
There you go.
Go? Great. Thank you very much. Thanks. Okay, can you hear me? Mayor and Council, thank you for that investment in Accelerate Orlando and that incredible opportunity. We expect to bring forth 4 Accelerate Orlando projects over the summer months, so the main, and into fall. But the main objective of this workshop is to provide you with the context for how those projects are going to fit into our overall plan for the city and define goals. So this is getting ahead of that big work. Before I even begin, though, I have to recognize the efforts of the Housing Department. The team has assisted heavily in moving the Accelerate Orlando homelessness forward over the past year. They additionally have Accelerate Orlando housing projects and a whole bunch of other housing projects that are a tremendous amount of work in addition, but these would not have gotten to this point without them. But their housing work is truly the answer, so it's equally as important, and it's been great teamwork together, and I'm grateful. On a quick note, too, while I'm at it, the workshop would not have happened without Kathy DeVoe. I'm so glad to have her back and the rest of my colleagues in the mayor's office, so thank you all for that. Real quickly, the outline for this workshop is talk quickly about our regional successes. Those are very important and often unseen. Talk a little bit about the city's role in homelessness, our city priorities within the regional continuum of care. A brief snapshot of the point-in-time data that was recently released with a focus, again, on the unsheltered. So it's not the big presentation of all of that data. I can certainly get that to you, but it's just a focus on the unsheltered. And then our 3-year action plan. And this lays out the work, much of which is already in progress, and the things that we are proposing moving forward, and again, providing goals, a few more than you see right there, but the 2 main goals are to reduce the number of unsheltered persons on the streets of Orlando by 50%. I believe we can do this, and no child will spend the nights on the streets of Orlando. So how are we going to do that? The regional successes, as I said, are the first thing to really talk about. Our regional continuum of care is #1 in the nation for our efforts to house people within the continuum. We received a #1 score on the HUD application in a very competitive nationwide process. So we're following the HUD directives and doing what they wanted and doing it very well. We helped to house more than 3,400 individuals during the past year. There's a significant investment of dollars that goes into that housing placement, but that's not what those of us who are focused on the unsheltered ever see. But it is a tremendous success. It is tracked and it is documented. The funding from HUD has increased 70% since we first implemented the Housing First strategy in 2015, including a record $12 million this year. In addition, there were $8.4 million in funding for homeless youth. The Homeless Services Network job can be a little bit like herding cats. There's about 50 member agencies in the network, but those are all independent, mostly not-for-profits, or all not-for-profits, who are operating their programs, and they're trying to bring that together toward regional goals. Our city funding is directed toward that plan too, but we have the same challenge in directing these agencies to work toward our goals and move in that same direction of housing first. Today, we have also provided and submit for the record, you should have a brief summary of the Homeless Services Network's annual report. That's just a snapshot of the last year to give you a one-pager of the successes and the things that they are doing. Their full annual report is available on their webpage for anyone that wants to see it, but HSN is committing to helping us keep that information updated so you're always aware of where our dollars are supporting these regional efforts and the successes that are going on. I thank them for getting that together for us. The Commission on Homeless Staff, Homeless Services Network staff, and many of our service providers are here today, and I would like to ask them to raise their hand if you're a volunteer or a staff member with any of the agencies or Homeless Services Network or working in homeless services. Thank you. Thank you. I know you join me in thanking them for the work they do year-round. The lead staff are available for questions at the end of my presentation. No one person knows it all, and I have relied on their expertise and guidance a lot over the past few years and even in the development of this plan, so they're here for questions if we need them also, and I appreciate that. The Commission is celebrating 30 years worth of work this year, so they've been around a long time doing this, and they're maintaining that conversation that homelessness is a housing problem, and the simple lack of cheap housing is the common cause of homelessness, where this issue always gets very complicated very fast, and I'm going to try very hard to keep it simple and high level today, but it is true. That's the main reason. Housing First works. You've heard a lot about this since we implemented it since 2015. Using that housing-focused system has shortened our length of homelessness and helped return people to stable housing as quickly as possible. The example I'm most familiar with is the Coalition for the Homeless. They have documented their ability to shorten the length of shelter stays and return people to homes or even prevent them from checking into a shelter as quickly as possible. This allows them to serve more people, so when people are at their door, if we can move people on. Housing First, different from housing readiness, means that we are go ahead and get people stabilized, get someone back in their home, get kids back in the schools from where they were as quickly as they can. Housing readiness means we're waiting to help people recover from addictions, work towards stabilization and mental illness, a lot of other issues. And both programs are important and can be an important part of our continuum, but most people are moving toward Housing First because all of those people can wrestle with those issues better in a stable home, and let's just get you back. So that's the general philosophy of our area, but not all shelters are operating that way. It's just important to know. Access points, those are really the intakes for someone who is homeless, a place to come in and see what you're eligible for and enter the system, be put into HMIS. These are critical that are receiving resources that can divert from homelessness quickly. And one of the many keys to making this work is providing funding for things, they get complicated, it sounds complicated, rapid rehousing, diversion, relocation, sending someone back, but really these are rental assistance models that offer assistance to place someone in a home as quickly as possible. The recidivism rates for these programs are actually still being studied. A transient population is very difficult to track, but locally where we can track people, they are effective. So if you come in and I can determine that you can be diverted back, we could write a check and send you back to where you were living, make up some back rent, pay a few months of future rent, we might be able to stabilize you very quickly and avoid the shelter altogether. That's what is really done at the access points. Orlando now has one that's open 5 days a week. We never had that access point. That's at the Christian Service Center, and that's thanks in part to city funding. We need more of these in the city and in the region overall. The permanent supportive housing, as I said, still works. We're supporting 600 people in permanent supportive housing. 97% of those individuals remain in their homes. This is the solution for the chronically homeless, most of whom have a disability. Just cheap housing won't answer it for them. They need cheap housing with supports. The challenge with this is the fiscally responsible way to further this is through a rental subsidy voucher. When you're placing someone in permanent supportive housing, they're going to permanently need that rental subsidy in order to maintain that home. And those are best done through the housing vouchers that are commonly distributed through the Orlando Housing Authority, Orange County Housing Authority, Section 8. They're known by many different things, but those housing vouchers are the best place to best funding source to use for permanent supportive housing. Placing someone using that voucher means they'll have that voucher permanently to move forward. The Orlando Housing Authority is working closely with the Commission on Homelessness and HSN to obtain more emergency housing vouchers, Embrace Families Initiative, and other long-term rental subsidy solutions, but we need those. The city's role in homelessness. I think this number often surprises people. We fund $3.8 million annually. Quite a bit of that is federal pass-through dollars, but it's a lot of dollars that come through the city of Orlando. 4 different departments. The Housing Department manages a lot of that. The Office of Community Affairs through our Community Investment Program grants, and the Mayor's Office. And the CRA also fund a lot. So the goals identified in this plan are written to bring out our collective efforts, to bring them together, and further focus that funding on city priorities within the regional system of care, and track the outcome of our work and how our dollars are, what our dollars are supporting. Those outcomes, I've been preaching since I started, are relatively simple, but sometimes very difficult to track. Shelter, housing, employment, and taking the next step toward homelessness. And that's a crucial one in the provision of day services. It's a crucial one in a housing first shelter if you're moving forward toward ending your homelessness. There are a few departments within the city that are not affected by our residents who are experiencing homelessness each day. The Orlando Police Department is a critical partner, very responsive and aware of the challenges. But as I believe everyone here knows, we cannot arrest our way out of these challenges. I can't tell you how many phone calls I get each week from people who want someone arrested, not understanding that that's a 24 to 72-hour hold in the jail. It's a misdemeanor offense, and they're returned to the streets later, and no one is any better off. The person has a fine. It costs the jail a lot of money. It's just not a good long-term answer. But OPD is responsive and has to do this in some cases to maintain safe streets for all people. Economic development and the CRA are invested and engaged in this planning and the direction of this work. Most specifically on the front lines, our code enforcement staff work hard every day to keep our streets safe and clean for all users. Brooke, Thomas, key members of their teams are on weekly and monthly planning sessions to move this work ahead. Our recent work has us moving toward the creation of a team of city departments and service providers who will work more closely with the service providers and more proactively to address areas where there are encampments growing. I have to give credit for the coordination and past planning and the work to the future already to Corey Keith, our division manager in code enforcement, who responds and communicates efficiently and effectively to everyone. He's just amazing, and I have to recognize that work. So, third thing, point in time count. The face of homelessness is evolving. Again, these are just a couple slides on the newest data and on the unsheltered. In the Tri-County region on January, on the day, the point in time that we went out on the streets and literally tried to find everybody, there were 2,267 homeless persons that day. It's generally considered an undercount. There were 1,680 persons in shelter in the Tri-County region and 587 unsheltered persons. When you go over to the right side, you see 1,626 of those people were in Orange County, 1,304 were in shelters. That rarely changes because the shelter beds don't change, but the majority of those shelter beds are in Orange County, and a significant number, the majority, are in the city of Orlando. The top number, I neglected to point it out, the Orange County homeless number, they have increased 6% since 2019. But when you go down to the bottom on the right corner on that slide, 322 unsheltered persons in Orange County is an increase of 40% since 2019. And that's most important for today. I also want to show you this. Without trying to look at that little data in there, I have asked the ambassadors, or we have all, the ambassadors have tracked and counted through a different methodology the number of persons perceived to be unsheltered through a windshield tour count that's been conducted weekly since 2021, since April of 2021. And the important point here is that our data does match the HUD data. And we have seen this same 50%, about a 50% increase on average over the past few years. It can greatly vary week by week. I took some outliers out to try to get to my average and look at it, but it looks like we have an average of 150 to 200 people who are unsheltered each day on the streets of Orlando within the CRA. The count is only done within the CRA. We don't have ambassadors everywhere else to do the other counts, but they're only there in the CRA. I'll discuss it further later on when we look at the results of the recent outreach and Paramore work that was completed, but we surveyed 256 unduplicated individuals in Paramore over a 1-month period. So that's the number of unsheltered people who were in the city of Orlando. Back to the big point-in-time data from HUD and the count that we did, there were 454 people with disabilities who have been homeless for more than a year. The recent, again, EPIC surveys of the unsheltered in Paramore found that 2/3 of the unsheltered in that Paramore community during that 1 month of outreach in March, very recent data, 2/3 have a disability that may have caused their homelessness. There's systemic issues to that need to be addressed. Primarily within our disabled, it's inadequate public supports. We've decided to have a public safety net that says you're getting a disability check, you're no longer able to work. That's been well documented. Personally, frankly, it's very difficult to receive disability for many people, but then we give you about $900 a month to live on. And the system is just not supporting. There's a lot of people that are just really challenged with that. There's shelters, the shelters really struggle to accommodate the needs of our, is that my, like, thanks, no problem. Like, oh, I do need to keep an eye on this, but for the record, Kyle went over 10 minutes, so I'm watching closely. I know, I'm trying to say a lot quickly, but it's inadequate public supports. It's important. The shelters struggle to accommodate their needs, severe mental illness, physical and emotional trauma, and addictions. Addiction is estimated by other studies to be the concern for about 30 to 40% of the unsheltered population. From my perspective, with those addictions, and that reality mostly does, though, is draw a lot of public sentiment away from the group. There are a lot of people who perceive that 100% of those individuals are struggling with addictions, and even having acknowledged that they have people in their own life who have struggled with addictions, they have very little sympathy for people out on the streets, so it's a real challenge. The vast majority of people with disabilities, addictions, severe mental illness, and trauma are housed. This again points to why housing first versus housing readiness, fixing people, can work. So our population is aging. Try to go a little bit past you here. Last data point is somewhat new. Nearly 400 people ages 50 to 65 were found to be homeless, including 146 who were unsheltered. Among those 65 and over, 144 were found to be homeless, 64 who were unsheltered. As rising rents outpace the increases in Social Security, these older Central Floridians have become the fastest growing segment of homelessness. There's some systemic issues with this also. Medicaid eligibility and access to assisted living need to be addressed as well as brought into our COC. This could be partly better through our access points and assessments for those facilities. So the rise and increase in homelessness, I think you're very familiar with. I'm going to jump right past it. The housing crisis, though, I'm going to touch on each one of these quickly. This is recent HUD data, rising rents. In 2019, the median two-bedroom was $1,264. In 2023, it is $745. So we've had a 481-month increase, $481 per month increase over the past few years. We have to focus on housing for the very low and low income to address the needs of this population. This data is from Orange County Court Judge Eric Dubois. He provides this, and he is saying that we're seeing evictions at a record rate. I'm going to ask you to focus quickly on the green lines on the right, starting in June of 2022, and see how they arise, and then continue with the blue lines on the left as it goes into 2023, since this might be hard to see. The court does have rental assistance programs and acknowledgement of those in place, so when a landlord files at the courthouse, the landlord is given information about rental assistance that the tenant may be eligible for, so that landlord can bring that back to the tenant. So the courts are doing a really great job of trying to prevent this, but they're definitely seeing this increase, and that makes for a scary future for us. It's the perfect storm. The pandemic eviction moratorium ended, emergency rental assistance programs have run dry, rents have continued to skyrocket, and supply and demand have continued to put pressure on the housing market. The increase in the unsheltered homeless is a lot the same, the severe lack of housing for very low and the rent increases. We had some shelter capacity reduced during the last year. One of the large shelters was undergoing some renovations and had some beds that were reduced. And then our opioid crisis, serious health problems, and inadequate safety net systems. So to move into our action plan on the unsheltered homeless. And again, trying to document our current strategic direction with that focus on the unsheltered and building the capacity of the existing organizations to serve this population. This was the outreach in Paramore that I continued to reference. Homeless Services Network actually had a task force that was meeting for a year to develop a pilot that would do outreach to the unsheltered in a specific geographic focus. They're always very regional, but they wanted to pilot and try something in a geographic area. Commissioner Hill was very active in asking them to take a look at the Paramore community. We were focused on that. They were about halfway through the research and getting ready when the Housing Department made us aware that there were dollars available. That was the HUD Rush funding that could fund that pilot. And the Christian Service Center accepted the grant to implement the pilot and begin flying the plane before we were even done building it. It was a tremendous amount of courage, and we just moved forward because it was the right thing to do. During that month of March, they did the outreach. Volunteer teams went out 17 times, maybe more. And 27 people were immediately placed into hotels. Women, children, and families are no longer experiencing homelessness because of that 1 month outreach. Those individuals were immediately eligible. That was the priority in the pilot, that if we found children, especially on the street, they'd be immediately placed. And the second part of it was surveying 256 unduplicated people and getting some of the new data that you see in front of you on this slide. I think what was surprising to me is that 50% were experiencing homelessness for the first time, and that 1/3 of that group were homeless for less than 1 year. This means people are becoming homeless and going straight to the street. We've got some real challenges to work through there.
And Lisa, let's be clear. A lot of these people are the people living in tents on Central and...
I'm going to get to that.
Okay.
Yes, I am. Yes. And there's really, though, was the task force that started to look at why. Why are they specifically in that area? Particularly because this data also, I don't have it on the slide, but Eric shared it with me, that only half of those individuals have accessed the services of a day center. So if you're not there for the lunch that's served or the meals or the dinners, why are you there? What is there in that community? And actually, let's see, I'm going to address that in just a moment. This under our lessons from EPIC. Here, I'll go to the bottom since Mayor referenced it. The task force, during the design of this and starting to look at the root causes, went out and asked people, why are you here? And it was predominantly, I receive food, I receive clothing, I receive tents, I receive things from very well-meaning groups who are out on the streets of our community passing these things out of the kindness of their heart. But they're actually working against our system of care in doing this. The whole point of day services is to bring you in to meet your basic needs so that we can then help you take the next steps forward toward ending your homelessness. And when those items are being handed out on the street, you're no longer encouraged to come in. The tents in particular are a real challenge, creating privacy, pockets of crime, and other challenges. But they're mostly well-meaning groups. I would ask you to make sure that you do not miss the My Word column that Pastor David Swanson at First Presbyterian Church wrote just about 10 days ago. I can get you a copy of it if you like, where he talked about the impact specifically of those groups and what they're doing and the whole toxic charity and what this really means for our community. So the task force started, and our work continues, and our city team will pick up a volunteer recruitment campaign. And we were out there talking to those meal groups, the people handing out the tents, and asking them to come and be part of our system. I think at last count, Christian Service Center told me they had about 10 groups that have come in and are now serving meals at the Christian Service Center, where people can be fed a meal with dignity. At the basics, we can sit down and have access to a restroom and all of the things that you and I enjoy. So we continue to try to bring those groups in, because that's a big part of what's drawing people to that community. We are also creating a city unsheltered response team. This will be a more proactive response to our encampments, and I'm going to go over it later. I think I'll let some of the other lessons go on here, you can see, but it's important to know the city does have a services first response. We fund that through the HOPE team at the Healthcare Center for the Homeless. We fund that through the Downtown Ambassadors. When we're made aware of an encampment or an individual, we send those people out first to offer services, make sure they're aware of shelter, help people find where to go before we then, especially when it's in a camp, have to contact code enforcement, ask them to notify the individuals. They literally leave signs letting people know in 48 hours and giving them time. We don't want to take someone's last belongings. As I said, arresting people is cyclical. So that approach is documented and we try to execute it, but we learned that it's bifurcated and inconsistent, and we hope to get better at that. Our after-hours response teams are needed. Our outreach teams lack the shelter and housing resources. And last but not least, the clients that are out there, the by name list of the EPIC clients, are going to have significant challenges for long-term housing. This is the city unsheltered response team that's part of this action plan going forward. It would actually kick fully into place on October 1st, but the planning will go on over the summer months. And that will bring together a multi-agency team coordinating that services first response with all those different departments from the city and the certain outreach providers that are out there, including Jump Ministries and our volunteer recruitment targeting organizations that are providing street-level services to the unsheltered. So this will more formalize this, better create that communication and planning and get ahead of it, plan for the events so that Hope Team and others are out there in advance of all that, and with the goal of reducing arrests and preventing the clearings and disposal of people's items, which no one wants to do. So the action plan in 4 slides, I'm getting there, is there's a vision statement on each of these, a quick list of the current strategies. Those are not ever all-inclusive. Again, I'm trying to make this very high level and simple. And then the current challenges toward meeting the outcome at the end. So if we are to reduce our presence of unsheltered persons on the street by 50%, we need all of the things that are currently in place, but we obviously need more affordable units for the very low income. That's under the challenges. And the biggest one, our permanent supportive housing inventory, is at capacity. We've got to find those vouchers. We've got to work with the Orlando Housing Authority and others to make sure that we get more of those vouchers available. But the 2 actions that are in progress, Guardian Care is a assisted living and skilled nursing facility out on John Young Parkway, a not-for-profit that reached out to Commissioner Hill with a 60-room vacant assisted living facility, that building, that they were then willing to utilize for housing for single older adults with healthcare needs who are in the homeless system. So they're looking to help homeless persons coming out of our homeless continuum of care. This would offer us 60 beds for a real target population, this unsheltered. So we're in the process of procuring a feasibility study to move forward and help that organization understand what it would take to run and operate that. Would be great. We continue to expand the number, or we're trying to work with the Orlando Housing Authority on rent subsidy, and then bridge housing at the Salvation Army site is also a potential. We're doing the feasibility on the pallets for that. That would add 50 units of bridge housing there, primarily to be used temporarily during transition, during the renovations, and then the long-term need would be addressed at that time to see how it went. But those are just some of our current actions, and some of those will be moved forward under the Accelerate Orlando initiatives. Our second vision statement is that people who are unsheltered can meet their basic daily needs and access to the services to end their homelessness. This is the day service piece that you've all heard a lot about. The proposed actions are projects under Accelerate Orlando. But why did we go in this direction? And I want to pause to jump on a few things there. Yes, years ago, a national expert, a brilliant woman, Barbara Hoppe, recommended to this region that a state-of-the-art day center was needed to open the front door to many on the streets. Christian Service Center has moved in this direction. They are one of the first projects we'll be bringing forward, and they're doing it right now with partners on their site. SALT, Service and Love Together, is doing basic needs, showers and laundry. Compassion Corner is providing case management. First Step Employment is finding people jobs, and they're working together. But the city commissioned its own research to understand, about a year and a half ago, the impact of day services. And that research has determined that 75% of those receiving these services take the next step toward ending their homelessness. In addition, more recent analysis of the local data showed that 70 to 90% of unsheltered persons who access case management, job search, employment, and mental health services all accessed a day center service prior to taking those steps. This is simple. An individual wants to meet their basic human needs first, and this is where our relationships are built. So they're a critical part of our continuum, and we need them. The city's success in permanent supportive housing, our region's success, is in large part due to the outreach of our HOPE team and the provision of day services, building relationships, being out there, and helping them meet their basic needs to stay alive during the day. So all 3 of these projects are coming to count. 3 3 of these projects that are listed under proposed action are coming to council this summer. That's the Christian Service Center, the creation of a state-of-the-art day center and a facility designed to do that, and the Salvation Army, the renovation of their men's shelter. That will be a partnership with the Orange County, by the way. They will be they're providing the funding to renovate the women's shelter. But contingent in the dollars for the City of Orlando for the Salvation Army's men's shelter is the provision of day services on site. So they would be required to add day services. We'd like to have a variety of different places where individuals can go and be safe during the day and don't have to be out on the streets of Orlando versus one site getting too large and unmanageable. So we're asking the Salvation Army to do that, and they are addressing that need. The Coalition for the Homeless Project is listed here, but that's a little ways off. In interest of time, I'm going to set it aside, but it's very important, and they will add day services too. The Zebra Coalition is LGBTQ bridge housing, LGBTQ youth bridge housing, but Zebra also provides day services over on Mills. And last but not least, very important, the Pathways Drop-In Center. That is a day center for persons with a diagnosed mental illness that closed during the pandemic and was a big part of some of the increase of our unsheltered during that time. They're still working to build those relationships back. Frankly, even though it's about a half-mile away from the Paramore and the core, that area, we probably need some bus transportation running over there to get people to go utilize that site. We're proposing that for the region that we need a low-barrier shelter, a jail diversion program. This is much like the pavilion that the Coalition for the Homeless used to operate, and I went and looked at some models. We don't have a site identified specifically at this point in time, but it's definitely a need, and it's listed there as an action because it would be an important part of achieving that goal of reducing the presence of people by 50%. And then 80% of the people accessing the day services will take the next step toward ending their homelessness, and that's a trackable goal. Diversion is a relatively easier one to skip by, but it's very important toward making sure that no child spends the night on the streets of Orlando. So if those access points, if our hubs, if our shelters, if anywhere, if we can make the resources available to immediately place a family with children and not have them spend the nights on the street, that's not that easy to do, but it could be done. This is a really important goal. Let's see, yeah, I think that's, it's also, in addition, we need the dollars for the rapid rehousing, diversion, and relocation. Those rental assistance programs that can be executed relatively quickly could help us, and we need more access points. All of our partners need to focus on that, and we need to get more of those. Our ambassadors, our HOPE team, and others need to be trained and assisting and helping out at those access points. We've got limited slots. The one we have 5 days a week is already backed up. So we'd like our vision to have clean and safe streets for all users. This is our current strategies, are all of those programs that you're familiar with, but that city unsheltered response team, we really hope to get proactive. I think I've said enough about it, but that would reduce the need for encampment clearings. Those clearings are tracked. We do clear those. No one's happy about it. No one likes it. No one likes to do that job, but it is done, and it's important toward moving forward, and we'd like to reduce that, and we'd like to reduce the number of arrests. So our regional unmet needs, I've spoken about all of those, but again, the one at the top, that low barrier shelter, is going to be critical going forward, particularly if these eviction risings and everything continue to increase our unsheltered. These are the Accelerate Orlando commitments. I believe I talked about all of them, but it's Christian Service Center, Salvation Army, and the Pathways Drop-In Center that are coming to you the soonest, and also the Homeless Services Network, dollars to support the organizational capacity for our regional continuum. They're very crucial, and they need development and financial and fiscal management assistance. So we're bringing those forward. I think 3 of those hopefully in June. So it's coming quickly. And there is a quick timeline to these. This is all of our existing work that's been going on that we want to have continue. And then this last timeline, and I will schedule meetings with all of you too, shows you when those items, when we expect to bring them forward, so that beginning is pending, means it's pending City Council approval, and when they will be completed, and why I believe we could get there in 3 years if we can move this along. I know, that was a lot. If you have questions, the really smart people in the audience can answer them. And I'm really thankful for them to be here. I want to thank Kathy again. I want to thank Heather and the entire Mayor's office team who support this work every day. A lot of my colleagues, as I said, there's very few city departments that aren't affected by this constituent, and we just have an incredibly responsive and compassionate team out there every day. Their engagement in the press also provides a high profile for the issue, and that's important for the development work of all the organizations who are trying to raise private funds. It's important. So, questions?
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you for presenting how much work is being done, has been done. Sometimes the visibility of the unsheltered that are on the street leads people to believe that nothing is being done, but that can be further from the truth in terms of us increasing the affordable housing product that we have. We had some celebrations recently of housing that opened on Mercy Drive, and all of those units we got from Fannie Mae over the course of time. So addressing the side of having more affordable housing, as well as those who are currently on the street. So thank you for that presentation. Commissioner Burns and Commissioner Stewart and Commissioner Sheehan.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Lisa, for that. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Lisa, for that presentation, and thank you to all of our service providers for all the work that you do. And just Mayor and City Council, you all know that I am the CEO of the Healthcare Center for the Homeless, and we talk about the HOPE team. That's a part of our program. So I just wanted to mention that. But Lisa, we know that the answer to homelessness is housing, and one of the projects that we're funding through the Accelerate program is the 150-unit hotel conversion. In your analysis, have we seen other opportunities like that particular program that we are pursuing or should be looking at?
I believe there's a developer, a hotel conversion developer, who has reached out to me that's identified a property that they're looking at. I think I heard from Brooke or another, that there was another hotel conversion that's also being looked at. So, yeah, they are. I think the word is out about the ability to do these. Down in Osceola, One Stop Housing does these across the state of Florida. There are other developers who have done them, and they can actually be naturally occurring affordable housing. They can renovate them and rent studio apartments with a full kitchen for about $1,100 to $1,200 a month. So the city subsidy, the Accelerate Orlando project that we move forward on, the Ambassador Hotel that is now Palm Gardens, is providing additional levels of housing for people at even lower incomes, even though it is going to be a mixed income property. So there are others out there looking at it, yes.
All right, and then my other question is, you mentioned of the individuals that the project was looking at who are unsheltered around a lot of the shelter providers, and there was a high percentage of them that had not taken advantage of the services that are being provided. And we know that one of the main things with the Housing First, the success was really around the low barrier. Mm-hmm. Finding them, getting them into housing. So are we having discussions with our shelter providers about lowering those barriers to where we would have less individuals around those shelters that are choosing not to participate, but more of hang out and maybe get a meal when they can?
Yes, we're having those discussions. Yes, it goes down to some pretty significant challenges on their part: safety and security. Mixed populations on one site, mixed genders, children on one site require you to then have security and barriers to others on that same site. So yes, it's an ongoing conversation, but I recently went over to Pinellas County to look at Pinellas Hope, which is run by the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office. And the criteria for admission is breathing. And they're open 24/7, and people can come in and out, although that changes as you move up in different levels and basically better beds and better services. But they've got a model over there that is really worth looking at for our community, but as everyone knows, it's going to be very difficult to site. So finding a location would be tough.
Yeah.
But yes, we do talk to them about that.
Yeah, I am familiar with that program, because one of my concerns would be making investments in the shelters, continue high barriers and with low utilization, and then we have to look at what's the best use of the limited resources that we have. And I would contend that it would be ensuring that we have the affordable housing that's available, or housing that's available to them, but also the low barrier, because I think that's key. So thank you.
Thanks, I do too.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner Stewart.
Lisa, let me say first, thank you. You are the hinge pin often for us on this dais to call the first person, and I appreciate your sensitivity and your knowledge. I want to tell you how much I appreciate that. I also want to say thank you to all my friends. This is kind of it's kind of a little bit of a homecoming. I know your hearts, and I know that our task is not a simple task. And it means a lot to me to have you here, number one, and number two, to call you friends. So thank you very much for that. Back in 2005, when we started looking at this process with Mayor Dyer, and even before Mayor Hood, that one open door policy of having a day center was a primary goal for us. It's taken 15 years to get there, but you know, I'm happy with where we're going. But the greater challenge in a broad spectrum to the community is it's not just one, it could be 8 or 10 or 12 based upon locations around the community and the work they do. And some may be slightly different in terms of the services they provide. How are we impacting some of those that aren't in our, I mean, I know we're the city, so we're stuck with what we do. But how are we getting some of those other jurisdictions interested in helping create something in their community so that we can make this a more diversified response?
Close partnership with the county is the best I can say toward answering that, and being aware. There is a day center, Matthew's Hope, out in Winter Garden, and then Samaritan Resource Centers on East Orange County. That's another day center. So the county supports Samaritan Resource Center heavily. So we stay in partnership with them. Christian Service Center, as you well know, has auxiliary campuses also where services are provided, so that's outside of the city core. I may not have mentioned it well enough. Jump Ministries, and she's here today, Tamela is here, they're operating a relatively newly opened day center out on West Colonial also. So we do have day center services available in the outskirts also.
And the connection with the Homeless Services Network database
all of those
becomes crucial.
Correct, yes. Matthew's Hope is not a member of Homeless Services Network, correct, but all the other ones are. And the same, you know, we have 3 main shelters, and they're right, the Orlando Union Rescue Mission also has chosen not to be part of Homeless Management Information System and part of that. He's a great partner in the community. They're doing great work there and great service, but they have some housing readiness programs. It's a different model, and they're all important to our community, but Matthew's Hope as a day center and rescue mission are 2 that are not part of that continuum today.
So the task really is,
formally,
it is a housing issue, but
it is.
The problem with the face of homelessness is, to the people in the community, the face of homelessness is the person they saw at the intersection. That's all they know.
I know.
They don't understand the entire complexity of where we're going or where we're trying to go. We did, as I shared before, we did an analysis called the 1,000-person study in 2005, and it seems the data continues. And that is that 80% of the people who we interviewed, and all we did was interview every person as a new person who came into the coalition, and stopped at 1,000. It was an easy thing to do. Every person that came in, when we got to about 80% of those people, considered Orlando their home. So the implication is that people are coming from out of town, or they're coming back from someplace else. We're a 4.2 million person community that has people in our own community that need help. And so I appreciate the work that you guys do. It means a lot to me personally. It's got 25 years invested in it. But at the same time, I think we're on the right track, but it is a slow track. But I think it's a more permanent track where we're moving. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Commissioner Sheehan.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Lisa, for everything that you do. A concern that I've had, with, especially in my district, with the Orlando Housing Authority, as HUD has talked about redoing our HUD, affordable housing, which is a majority of the affordable housing that we have, is there's just been pressure for these mixed-use redevelopments. And my concern is that they might keep the number that we have now instead of adding to the number of units that we have. And we don't need to put market rate units. We already have market rates surrounding the entire community. So I think this is a fallacy, and I think it was really kind of a land grab to put market rate. And I saw a lot of developers wanted in on it, but I think we really need to protect our housing authority properties and make sure that we add to the number of units available when they're redeveloped instead of taking away, because these are now getting to be really, desirable sites and desirable areas, and we need to really, really need to protect them. So that's a concern that I have, and that will, exacerbate the affordable housing problem if we lose units. And, as we do different programs, it seems like we're always sunsetting certain affordable housing
Yes.
programs that we do. They sunset, so we're never really building. Some are coming off, and, we need to figure out ways for long-term strategies to add, especially with the affordability problem that we have. So that's a concern that I've got. And just having gone through this with my own mom, and I mean, we had a lot of resources available to us, but it was still really hard getting her placed. And it was going to take us 5 months, once she ran out of money, to get the Medicaid to kick in. And what are people going to do during that 5 months, especially if they don't have family or they don't have someone looking out for them? I could see where if you had a senior who was having, their mental capacities diminished, they get homeless, and they don't have any family members to help them, and they don't know how to access this it was crazy to figure out how to qualify for Medicaid. Once, and like I say, my sister was an accountant. I'm a city commissioner. I'm connected, and I still had a hard time figuring out what do we do when she runs out of money.
Me too.
Having experienced that myself, and we had resources. I can't imagine people who don't have family, who don't have the resources that we had, and I could see why the number of homeless seniors are increasing. So I think that's something. I'm glad to see that we're looking for facilities that we can, transition folks into, but that's going to become more and more of an issue, especially as the baby boomers age and stuff like that. We need to think about our most vulnerable, and when seniors are in that situation, they are at their most vulnerable. So this is a whole nother group that we have to worry about now, in addition to the quote-unquote traditional homeless, the new homeless that we've got, the people who are, I feel very bad. I see them pushing all their belongings in these huge shopping carts with their dogs behind them, because I know they just got, they were just evicted. So, how do we access and get those folks into, there's a whole lot of different pockets, but thank you for recognizing all that. Thank you for also including the seniors and realizing that there are all these different needs. And Commissioner Stewart, I know you've dealt with it many, many years, but again, these are all things that we need to address, and it's not easy. And Orlando does take on the majority of the services for the homeless population in the area. We do as much as we can, but we also need partners within other communities, within other municipalities. Everybody just can't say, oh, okay, Orlando, a city of 280,000 people, even though there's millions in the metropolitan area, we're still taking the brunt of it here in Orlando. So thank you for all that you all do. I know we're doing a lot of it here in the Central Core, but and there's a lot, of moving pieces to kind of put together, but appreciate everything everyone's doing.
The only thing I'd like to reflect on in response to, though, is the critical need to continue, as you said, to focus on those Orlando Housing Authority sites and work with the leadership at the Orlando Housing Authority on that. The designs, that is a critical asset in our community. Those are beautiful locations, and there are new designs that could allow them to mix the incomes on those sites without losing the number of currently very low and low income there. They could build up. Just generally speaking, there are a lot of things they could do to somewhat mix without going down in numbers, and we need to really stay on top of that work.
My concern, like Mayor, if I may, but my concern there is that pressure to redevelop isn't adding affordable units. It's keeping them the same, whereas I think we should be adding. And I understand the economic, concerns there. I get it.
Yeah.
But I just don't want us to be pushed in a situation where we're just maintaining instead of adding, and we're taking advantage of those very desirable sites. Instead of doing a mixed use, I'd rather have, instead of having 300 units and then adding another 150 market rate, why not we add 150 more of affordable?
Right.
Why can't, it seems like we're always being pushed in the direction of defending the units that we have instead of adding to the number of units that we have. And developers are always, I get it, developers want to make money, I understand it, but if they could make money building affordable units in the 1950s and 60s when a lot of these were built, why can't we figure out how to build them now, or get the federal subsidies that we need, or do the work that we need to make sure that we have affordable housing available? There's plenty of market rate available all throughout my district. but there's only so much affordable housing available in Reeves Terrace. And that's what I'm very passionate about, making sure that we protect. And that's just my area alone. I mean, we have many other, affordable housing properties throughout, Orlando, downtown Orlando, but that's my concern, is that there's this pressure. Oh yeah, we can keep the number of units. Why aren't we looking to add? Why aren't we looking to expand instead of just defending? We're always defending the number of units that we have instead of looking to aspire to more. So thank you, Mayor.
And Commissioner, to the point I made earlier, the properties, I guess over 7 in total that we got back from Fannie Mae about 7 years ago, every one of them has affordable housing on those sites. So I think that ends up being over 600 units between
Yes.
all of those projects.
Yep. It is important. There's so much great work that's been done that was not referenced today throughout housing and all that work, but thank you.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, everybody, for your service. That's unmeasurable. Lisa, I just want to expand on my partners here on their comments, but I have a few questions also. You mentioned 50 members agency, right? Approximately 50 members. Does that include the 25 government agencies we have in the Tri-County area?
No.
No?
Right here. They participate, yes, that's a good point.
Okay.
But a member agency is a service provider that's putting information into the Homeless Services Network and providing services. But they're very much part of the Commission Board, the Homeless Services Board, and partners.
I want to give you a platform because we just formed a committee on homelessness at the Tri-County League of Cities. We have talked about this before, and I figure this is something that could help you guys, give you guys a place where you can bring the message all at once. And we can possibly work together with you guys because as my fellow commissioners mentioned before, I think we need to expand its resources. I mean, the city of Orlando provides quite a bit already, but I think we need to expand this to other areas in the Tri-County area. It's not only our problem, it's everybody's problem. And what's happening is we're taking the bulk of things, and because of that, everybody's sending their issues to us for us to handle. And there's no problem with that. We can, we'll work with our people as much as we can, but I think we should share this and with other communities. So I would definitely communicate with the Tri-County League of Cities, with our committee, to see if you guys can do a presentation just like the one you guys did today, and see if we can go ahead and start connecting with those who may not be as active as they should be in all levels of government. And if we can expand that, we will do so. But thank you for what you're doing. It's all about accountability. You were talking about housing, but also an addiction and other mental health issues. With the addiction, I had a question. Have we determined which kind of addiction is predominantly the one affecting our homeless people the most?
I don't
Any
have that data off the top of my head.
Alcohol, drugs, I mean.
Can you just speak it?
Yeah. The current drug the homeless adults are accessing most often would be a very cheap synthetic form of Molly or MDMA. But addiction issues aren't the predominant reason people are becoming homeless. It's just that there is a problem within the community right now. And I will say the Atlanta Police Department does an excellent job of jumping on dealers very, very quickly.
Good.
Because of it's inexpensive narcotics that are the most prevalent amongst the population of adults experiencing homelessness.
And for those who don't know, that's Eric Gray, the Executive Director of the Christian Service Center.
I appreciate it. Thank you. That's all I had. Thank you so very much.
And I think to the point of the work that we've been doing in Paramore, trying to identify each individual situation, every homeless individual or homeless family has a different story and a different reason that they've become homeless. So it's not easy work, and you can't just cast everybody in one way or another. Every individual circumstance needs to be addressed perhaps in a different manner. Lisa, thank you so much for that. But all the service providers, stand up and let us just thank them for the work that you do. Not easy work. Okay, that concludes our workshop for today. We're going to go into our agenda review meeting, but we're going to take about a 2-minute recess so that folks that don't want to hang out for the agenda review meeting can make their way to the exits.